Kennedy also has been very critical of the political party for nixing any primary debates. His other primary rival, Marianne Williamson, agrees with that. She's written an op-ed titled, "Debate Us, Mr. President." It reads, quote, "Candidate suppression is a form of voter suppression, and the party that purports to be the champion of democracy should not be so wary of its own house." The end of that quote. The latest Fox poll taken before he held a single event put Kennedy at 16% in the democracy primary. That's Fox News. A recent CNN poll now shows Kennedy with 20% among Democrat and Dem-leaning independent voters. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the mez with me in Focus now. Welcome.
Thank you, Harris.
First of all, let's get to the obvious here. The president doesn't even want to debate you. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think, his poll numbers are very high right now. And I think that he would rather not debate any of his opponents right now. During the last election, during the pandemic, he was able to conduct it from the White House without doing debates. I think it's important to do a debate now, and particularly because he will have to debate his Republican opponent. Mm-hmm. And if that's Donald Trump has shown his acumen at debate, and the president is really going to have to be on his toes and asking to prepare for that debate when they're going to have the very intense and robust debates in the Republican Party, and asking President Biden to prepare for that debate by, staying in the White House and not really being out in the campaign trail is like asking a prize fighter to prepare for the big bout by sitting on the couch and eating Chick-fil-A. It's not, he needs to be on his toes, and if he's going to beat the Republican.
Well, you and I both agree that those waffle fries will get you ready for anything. Maybe not running for president, though, so the president has to get out. So where would you start with this president? Because I have read that you've said that the American public is being lied to right now.
I think we were lied to about during the pandemic. We were repeatedly lied to. The goalposts were repeatedly changed. We're being lied to about the the Ukraine war. We're being told once the story about the Ukraine war that we're over there as a humanitarian mission, but it's become clear that there's another agenda behind that war, that it's about regime change, it's about exhausting the Russians. And that means the Ukrainians are caught in a proxy war between two great powers that are manipulating the situation for geopolitical reasons and sacrificing hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian youth.
Are we part of that cabal that you're talking about?
Yeah.
And what do you think the president is not being honest about?
Well, one, about the death count in the Ukraine.
You think the president of the United States is lying about how many people really...
I didn't say the president's lying. I don't know what the president knows and what he doesn't know.
But his administration.
I think the administration and the Pentagon are not being honest with the American people about the sacrifice of Ukrainians. And I think the Ukrainian government is also not being honest.
So, you are
the best data now shows that about 350,000 Ukrainians have been killed on the front lines.
Wow.
And we're not being told that. And we're also being lied to about what the purpose of the war is. We have this comic book depiction, that the war is a response simply to the illegal and brutal invasion by Putin. Mm-hmm. But in fact, the neocons in the White House have been provoking this war for 10 years. And continue to avoid all talks of peace and all efforts to settle the dispute.
It's interesting. I watch a lot of what people say on social media just in terms, well, we're in election year, but in terms of where they think the hot topics really are. You have been called someone, obviously, the Boston Herald said that you're the youngster on the Democratic side of the ticket. So they're looking, which I thought was pretty funny, especially ironic after what we saw with the president's fall yesterday. But you've also been called somebody who really is counterculture within your own party. The anti-vaccination activist is what they call you. Somebody who is, looking at things like the Ukraine war and seeing difference in the facts that we think that we know as a public. Do you think that the President of the United States and you, if you were to debate, what would that look like?
That's something that I would like to see.
I'd like to see it too.
I'd like to explain. I'd like either President Biden or President Trump explain the lockdowns to us. That was a $16 trillion mistake. We shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the middle class in this country to the super rich, this new aristocracy of billionaires. The lockdowns created a billionaire a day, 500 new billionaires, and the people who came into the lockdown with $1 billion increased their wealth by 30%. We had, 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. Some of those businesses had 2 or 3 generations of sweat equity, of currency, and we closed 3.3 million businesses without due process, without just compensation. The White House, both White Houses were collaborating with Amazon and with the other social media sites to shut down their competitors. Amazon got to shut down 3.3 million competitors, and we got a 2-year lesson, the entire public, on how to, do our shopping on Amazon. And those businesses, those retail businesses, which are the heart and soul of the middle class and our democracy, are now shut down.
Mr. Kennedy, it's interesting because you take on Biden there, you take on Trump there, you say across administrations. Yet this is the first time I've heard you say that it won't be Biden who actually takes on the Republican. I mean, are you serious about this? Because look, in your own party, this is what some are saying. Suraj Patel is a former Democrat candidate for Congress, and he recently said this on The Focus. Let's watch.
Look, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a conspiracy theorist. He is running for president, and there's nothing more to say about it. He has 0 chance of winning this primary. He, is doing this for publicity.
Your response?
Well, I believe that I will win, but we'll see.
Now, why do you believe that you will win? What's happening right now?
I just feel a tremendous amount of support, and our internal poll numbers are showing me stronger against both Republican candidates than President Biden. Oh, I think when when that kind of polling becomes public, that Democrats are going to want somebody who can beat Governor DeSantis and who can beat President Trump. And I don't think I'm not confident. I don't think anybody is confident that they have that in President Biden. So I think that will persuade a lot of people. But I also think the controversies are moving. And of course, the DNC is going to try to discredit me as a conspiracy theorist. But what I would say is, if I'm a conspiracy theorist, show me something I got wrong. Show me one fact that I misstated.
Well, I know you've gone after Fauci. You had a best-selling book because you went after the nation's top doctor. And that's really when the talk about you began within the Democratic Party. They wanted to shut you down. 2 really quick things. You saw the president fall. Let's put this back up there. Nikki Haley, GOP presidential candidate, had called for competency testing for people over the age of 75. Others have said maybe you don't even put an age to it. We need to know that about everybody. When you see that fall, and they'll put it up eventually, at the Air Force Academy yesterday with the President of the United States, is that a person that you think is ready to take on the competitors across the aisle that you just mentioned?
Well, my reaction to that is a little different. I saw the sandbag that somebody put up there that they shouldn't. And anybody can trip and fall. So I think there's other things, that questions about the president that...
Like what?
Well, I mean, people can ask about his age, about his mental acuity, and, other people have as much competence about evaluating that as I do. But I have compassion for the president, and I wish him the best. I think...
But you think you can beat him in a primary?
I think I can beat him in a primary.
Do you think age plays a role?
Well, there's a lot of people who are at 80 or 90 have as much mental acuity as anybody else.
100%.
So I would disagree with Governor Haley. I don't think people at 75 years old should automatically get a test. I think that's not right. But I do think that it's an issue that people should be concerned with.
Before I let you go, because people will watch, and I know you've been asked this so many times, you have talked about fentanyl and drug addiction. You have talked about your own health. What would you say to the situation that we have at the border right now with all that fentanyl crossing?
Well, there's more than a fentanyl crisis at the border. It's a humanitarian crisis. And it's the result of policies that have, it's a result of a lot of things, a lot of different, conspiracy of different factors. But one of the clear things that we need to do is to protect our borders, to make them impervious. There's no nation in the world that can have open borders. And, it's part of being a country. You close your borders and you manage immigration humanely, and you manage it in a way that is going to benefit our country, and we need to do that.
Well, you differ from Biden on that.
Yeah, I mean, I differ from Biden on almost anything, so.
But you are still a Democrat, we know, because you're very much against pipelines. That much I've read. You're on the green. Real quickly, just a word about that.
About what? About the carbon? I don't like geoengineering products, so I don't like the carbon capture projects. And I don't like the top-down totalitarian controls that go along with a lot of those issues. I believe that we should be protecting habitat. We should be focusing on regenerative agriculture. We should be governing our markets with free market capitalism. And
I wish the president would debate you. It would be an interesting situation, and it would really set us up for what we will see in a much more informed way in 2024. Glad you're here.
Harris, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. By the way, I'm a fan of your wife, Cheryl Hines. I know everybody is. Curb everybody's enthusiasm on that. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.